All right, thank you for joining us. My name is Billy Daffodil. We're here with Ammon Shea, who has just published a book called Reading the OED, One Man, 1 Year, 21,730 pages. Ammon, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You spent a year reading the entire Oxford English Dictionary. And I guess the way I understand, you've been reading dictionaries for a number of years now. What made you wait to read the mother of all dictionaries?
I've been reading dictionaries, as you say, for the past 10 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of somewhere between a hobby and an affliction. I began reading them when I came across an old copy of Webster's Second International Dictionary, and I sat down and decided to read it one day. Read the OED for a few years now, but it's a kind of large book, and that made me shy away from it. Just
20
just
volumes, 137 pounds. Right?
Yeah, 137 pounds, 20 volumes currently. It's about 59 million words in there.
Now, in the book, you have 26 different chapters, understandably, in which you talk about your experience over the course of your reading the book, and then list for each letter all of the words that stuck out to you. Some very nice words I can think of, like apricity, which means.
Yeah, apricity it's a great word. It describes the warmth of the sun in the wintertime. And the way I phrased it was, I read the OED so you don't have to.
Yeah.
Because
Thank you.
You're welcome. I can understand that many people would not want to take off an entire year of their life to read through this dictionary. But there are so many wonderful, wonderful words in there, and there's so many wonderful words in the English language. It's really kind of great to come across these words that describe something that you always knew there was a word for, but you didn't know what it was. It's like having a kind of itch in your brain scratched that you didn't quite know was there. One of my other favorites is a word like petrichor, which describes that kind of wonderful loamy smell that comes off the ground when it first starts raining.
Yes.
And so many people that I've spoken to said, I always knew there was a word for this, but I never knew what it was. And so when you find a word like that, it really makes you think that this is an endeavor that was not a total waste of time.
There are words like that. There are also some less appealing words. I think of fleetin', which.
Yeah, fleetin' is a nice descriptive term. It means having the color of skimmed milk. And I don't know why it sounds more disgusting than it actually is,
Yeah.
but it's a really unpleasant word. Particularly living here in New York City, there are so many words that are just so perfectly applicable, such as be mute, which is one of my favorite definitions. The Oxford English Dictionary defines it. I believe the exact wording they use is to drop dung on from above, as does a bird. If you've ever walked down a street for more than a few days in New York City, you're familiar with that sensation. Likewise, if you've ever taken public transportation, either here in New York or anywhere else, you will recognize the utility of a word like scrouge, which means to press up against somebody so as to make them uncomfortable. So that, whether you live in the city or the country, I'm sure it doesn't matter. These words are terribly useful. Now, I don't think that you should take these old obscure words and start throwing them around in conversation, and if you do, I hope that somebody pokes you in the eye, because it's really just kind of an offensive thing to do, to use words that nobody knows. But the thing that's wonderful about them is that you start paying more attention to some things when you notice, or when you know that there's a word for it, like a word like advesperate, which describes the turning into evening when the day starts becoming night. I don't need to use this word in conversation, but I pay more attention to it when dusk is falling and it begins to advesperate. So that's a pleasant side effect of knowing the word.
Now, in reading the OED, I happen to I guess some of the pages I dog-eared were those in which some of these words just stuck out that seem to tie into the election season we're in the midst of. Think of a word like kakistocracy, which.
Kakistocracy means government by the worst possible people.
Yeah.
And I think every generation is convinced that they are living under some sort of kakistocracy.
I hope we're not headed there.
I hope we're not headed there. I hope we're leaving that. But that again, it's one of the wonderful things about reading through the OED or any dictionary is that you come across so many words that describe things that is so particularly and so specifically. For instance, there's a word like bayard, which describes it means a person who has the self-confidence of the ignorant. Yeah. And personally, I cannot help but see, unfortunately, Sarah Palin's face flash in my mind every time I see that word. Sometimes I guess I see George Bush's face. Yeah. Maybe somebody else will see Barney Frank or or Ted Kennedy, depending on what point of view you have. But the flip side of that, there are words like heterofemize, which means to say something other than what you meant to say, which always makes me think of Joe Biden on his first day of campaigning when he referred to Obama as clean and articulate. I think he really meant to say something a little bit different. If you think about, say, George Bush and wish that he were still his father, you can think of a word like father war, which means the state of being worse than your father. If you're a real W fan, you can also think of these words like father better, which literally means, in Old Scottish, the state of being better than your father. So there's these very specific words, and they're great to find. But one of the other things that's really kind of entertaining about reading all the way through the dictionary is you find these other words that you thought you always knew. And it turns out that they mean something a little different than what you first thought they meant. And, since we're talking about politics, it seems to me that very often recently when a politician says something inordinately stupid, he then suddenly turns around and says, I'd like to clarify. You always hear clarify, I'd like to clarify that. And it seems like the meaning of clarify is somewhat broader than I used to think it was. And recently when I looked up clarify in the Oxford English Dictionary, it turns out sense 3b means to defecate. So it really makes so much more sense now. For instance, when the stock market crashed the other week and McCain's campaign manager, Steve Schmidt, got in front of the cameras and started talking about how, I know that Senator McCain said that the economy is fine, but I'd like to clarify. And I'm thinking, clarify, sense 3b. Boy, I bet you really would like to clarify. Your candidate has committed political suicide in front of national television. Unfortunately, it turns out that defecate doesn't really mean what we think it means. Defecate means to clarify. To clear up something. Now that's what it used to mean, a long, long time ago.
It's not altogether, does it? When did the headache start? H, J?
No, the headache started immediately. The headache started about 20 pages into A, at the very beginning.
How did you deal with it? Any recommended drugs?
I recommend lots of coffee. It makes the headaches go a little faster sometimes, but they really didn't go away. They went away a little bit. For all intents and purposes, they stuck around for the entire reading of this dictionary. And so what I did was I decided to view the headache in a different way, and it was the more that I read, the worse the headache would be. And so I chose to interpret the headache as a sign of progress rather than as an affliction.
What did your girlfriend think of the idea of you spending a year reading this thing?
My girlfriend is herself a former lexicographer. She defined words for several years for the Merriam-Webster Company. Okay. So she was considerably more understanding of this than most people would be, I think. She got a little bored of my constantly telling her about some words, but she had, I thought, really remarkably good grace about it.
Good. On my mind, should we sell the movie rights for reading the OED, who would you want to play you?
It's a bit of a toss-up between whether I broadened my mind or my ass more by sitting there in total inactivity. Probably equally, both of them were about equal parts. So I would have to say that the beginning should be somebody like a young Brad Pitt, and by the end, somebody like an older Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah.
With thick.
I'm glad to hear you finished it, and you survived to tell the tale.
God.
Well, this is Ammon Shea. Thank you for sitting with us here, we hope to see you on some larger screen elsewhere.
Well, thank you.